Okay, so in this video, we're going to be looking at building families within Revit. And to start that, I'm just going to create a new file with the basic Imperial project. If you are using metric, all the better to you. But where I'm at, we have to use Imperial units, so that's what I'm using. For most people, building your first family, you're going to be starting from the modeling environment within Revit. So that's where I'm starting at. And we'll go to File, and we'll go to New, and we'll go to Family. And then we're presented with a list here of different family types that we can use. So unless you know exactly what category of family you're going to be using, and even if you do know, there's maybe a few minor use cases where you actually want to determine this beforehand. But what I've found is that for 80% of the families I create, I'm starting with a generic model, and then I can change the category later to match what I need. So that's what I'm going to start with here. I'm going to click on Open. So we're presented with this family new project. Back to the family categories, the reason why I didn't specify that earlier is that if I go over here, I have family types and I have family category parameters. And if I click on that, I can scroll through and I'm able to change, aside again for a few edge use cases, I'm able to change that family category to match most of the categories that I wanted. And this will automatically insert the information that you would have gotten when you started a family from these different categories initially. But because we've started with generic, we have kind of a blank building slate, which I find is very useful. So the next step, before we start creating any kind of geometry, I like to think about building a family, essentially 3 components. This is based on, I think it's a Revit OP ad blog, is that there are bones, muscles, and skin. And the bones are going to be your reference planes and your lines. The muscles are going to be your constraints and your parameters and things that you can flex around. And your skin is going to be the geometry that you actually view or makes up the model. So to start, we're going to need to build up some bones. And to do that, we're going to be using either reference planes or reference lines. For most cases, I will be using a reference plane. The only time that I'm really using reference lines is when I need to change maybe like an angle parameter would be a good use case for that, and we can maybe dive into that at the end of this, but I think I just want to start off on some basics. So our basic model here to kind of just get started is going to be a box, and we want to make this parametric so that we can change the width and the height and the length of this box within Revit. It's going to give us the kind of fundamentals, because if you can build a box, you can start to expand on other types of geometry. So to build these bones, I'm going to start with a reference plane. And I know I want a box, and I want it centered around these base reference planes. So I'm just going to drag these out very quickly. I'm not too worried about them being perfect, because I'm going to then use the muscles to flex these the way that I need. So I'm going to use a shortcut. One of the very useful shortcuts if you're making families is DI for dimension. And I'm going to drag out a series of dimensions for each side of my box. And the ones that are centered on, or the ones that are these kind of middle reference planes, are currently defining my origin. And I want my box to kind of squish around that origin. So I'll select my first couple of dimensions, and unfortunately this is hidden in here a little bit. I might just delete this dimension here really quick just for to show the video, is that you can toggle this to be equal. And so now that I know that my geometry is centered around my origin, I will do the same for the other side. Again, I'll delete this just so it's a little bit more clear. So now I have equal dimensions on either side. I'm also going to add back in those dimensions I just deleted that are my overall dimensions. So now I'm going to build up the muscles a little bit more, and I'm going to add parameters to these dimensions so that once I load my family into Revit, I can change these parameters and make adjustments. So I will click on this dimension, and if I look up in my Modify tab, I have a label dimension area, and if I use the drop down, I only have one option here, and that's not what we want. So I need to create a new label or a new parameter. So if I hover over this little box, I will click on Create Parameter, and then I will give this a length. And so initially what I like to do is keep the names of my parameters as simple as possible because I can always go back and change them. So for this, I could call this maybe width, and that's pretty simple already. But for demonstration purposes, I'm going to call this X. And I have a few other options within here. So I want to make this a family parameter. I want this parameter associated to my family. I'm not going to get into shared parameters. I'm really not trying to link this parameter to the project overall, or have shared parameters are kind of their own video, and let me know in the comments if you want me to go over that. But for, again, 90, maybe more than 80, 99% of families, I'm using a family parameter. The next major decision I have to make is a type or an instance. This isn't too big right now. I can always go back and change this. And so type parameters are going to be exposed when you go to edit type within the Revit project, and you select the family and you click on edit type. That will allow you to change this parameter. Instance parameters will be exposed in the properties of that family. So I'm going to do two use cases. I'm going to say my X dimension is going to be an instance parameter, and I want this grouped under dimensions. That seems to be exactly what I want it to do. And I will click OK. And then this other one, I will call this one Y. So I'm going to create a new parameter, and I will call this Y. And for this one, I'm going to make this a type parameter. Again, grouping under dimensions, everything should be good here. Before I get going too far into the parameters, one thing I want to mention is that naming your reference planes is a good thing to do. So I might call this one back, and I will call this one front. I will call this one left, and I will call this one right. And so now I have these labeled, and the reason for doing that is it provides me a few things that I wouldn't have if I didn't label them. One is that I can, when I hover over them in the Revit model, I will be able to see them and see the name of it so that I know that I'm aligning to the right thing. Secondly, when I'm creating geometry, if I want to use this as the reference plane, I have this now exposed as an option for my dropdown. And that'll come into play when I'm actually creating the geometry, which is what we'll do next. So we're going to make the skin. And if I click on create, and I go over here to set, and I click on set work plane, we can see that I only have the work planes that I've named exposed to us. So that could be very useful in some cases. We can also click on pick a plane and build it from there, but I find that labeling these is goes a lot further, so it's worth the time to do so. I'm going to click on cancel because that's not what we're going to do. I'm just going to make a simple box. So I'm going to click on extrusion, and I am intentionally going to draw this not aligned with my bones because I want to make sure that these are locked. So I will use the second shortcut that I find to be the most useful when making families, and it is AL for align. So I will type in AL to align. We can also get there under modify and go to the align button. I find it faster to do it this way. So I'll click on the reference plane I want it to align to, and I'll click on the line that I want to be aligned, and I will lock this into place. And I will go around and I will do this for the rest of my lines. And what this is doing is making sure that now my skin is connected to my bones and that my muscles can then flex the bones in the skin around. So now that I have that done, I will click OK. And I want to test that all of this is working. Now I have my box in here, and I want to be able to test the X and Y parameters. So I will click on really quickly over here on the properties. There's a family types button. I will click on that. And so for X, I want to flex this. I might call X to be 6. And I'll click on apply. And I can see that easily moves it out. And so my muscles are flexing the way that I want, or my parameters are flexing the way that I want. And for Y, maybe I'll call this 2. And now I can see that is also flexing. And so my geometry now, my skin, is a resultant of my bones and my muscles. Hopefully that makes sense for kind of how those three work together. But there's one more dimension that I want to make sure that I'm able to flex. And there's one more muscle that I need. And that is the height of my box. So I will go to an elevation view. And I can see that I have some arrows I can push and pull. So I can change this if I would like. But I want to be able to expose this within the Revit environment. I still also have the left and the right, but if I move that, it's going to give me an error, and it's going to say it doesn't meet the constraints, which is a good thing, because I want to actually constrain the top to my parameter or to the muscle for the height. So I'll go back to the Create tab, and I'll make a new reference plane for the height. So now I have my bones for the height. The next thing that I want to do, and I'll rename this to height, and then I will create a muscle or a dimension that goes between those. And I want to make this a parameter, so I'll select a new parameter, and I will call this Z, since I'm keeping everything as simple as possible for now. And I will leave this. Also, maybe I'll make this an instance. I want this under dimensions. This sounds good. And so now all I have to do is constrain my box to the bones and muscles I've set up. So I will also align these using the align tool, and I will click AL. I'll click on the thing that I want to align to, and then the thing that I want aligned, and I will click lock. I'm going to hit escape now, and I'm going to flex this Z parameter by going into my family types, and I will change this to 4 feet and click apply, and now I can see that my box is flexing and moving the way that I want. The next thing I'm going to do is to save this family so that I don't lose any of the work that I've done. I'm just going to save it to my desktop, and I will call this, I've already made one called Squishy Box, so maybe I'll call this tut for tutorial to tut box. And then I will load that into my project using the load into project tool. And I can click on that and I might drop a couple of different instances of that around. So I want to next explain the difference between a type parameter and an instance parameter. So if we remember back in my family, I have the width set to an instance parameter, and I have the height set to, or the x parameter is an instance, and the y is a type parameter. And so with the instance, I can drag this around, and if I look over in my properties, I can see that I have this x. So I can change this on the fly, and it doesn't have any effect on the other families. So they're all still in the same type of family, but they're all very much have a different x value. So that's what an instance is. So per instance, I'm allowed to change that parameter. But if I go into edit type, I can see that my y parameter, the y muscle that I created, is set to 2. So now if I change this to 4 and I click apply, we'll see that now all of the dimensions are now set to 4. And again, if I go in and I edit this and I say edit type, and I'm going to change that to a 3 and I click apply, it changes all of them without affecting the instance itself. So really important distinction between those two different types of parameters. The next thing I want to go over is I want to touch back on the reference planes a little bit. So let's say I have my project here, and I'm just going to draw a simple wall over on this side, and I want to align these to the wall. And if I click on AL and I click on I'm going to tab my way to the outside of the wall, I can see that I have my outside edges, but I can also see that I have these center lines as well that I can snap to. And for the instance parameter, if I click on that, it's going to move the whole thing over and connect to it. And the reason that it does that, I want to go over the difference between a strong and a weak reference plane. So the reason that it moved over is because it is a weak reference plane. So it'll move the entire object over. If I set this then to a strong reference plane, which if I select the reference plane, I can see over in the properties, I can change that. And I'll do the same for the other side. I will change this also to a strong reference. And I will load this into the project and overwrite the existing version. And I'll move this back away. So now if I align the outside to this, we can see it moves that entire reference plane. So a weak reference plane will move the entire object over. A strong reference plane will essentially flex the whole model to match or to align. So a big difference there. I could save two different types of this out to show it, but to kind of really drive this home, I'll jump back into the reference level of this. I'm going to change both of these back to weak, which is what they came in as. And I will load these into the project and overwrite. And so I've moved both of these using strong references, and I will move this last one with a weak. And we can see it move the entire piece of geometry instead of flexing it. So big distinction there. The last type of reference plane that I want to mention is not a reference. This is also important. Once you start building out a lot of different, and actually I don't want to make a reference line, I want to make a reference plane. So let's say we're making a crazy piece of cabinetry. We have, tons of different reference planes, or it's a door, and we have to align the different pieces and the trim and everything that's coming out. And I load this into my project. And I'll just move this out for demonstrations. Yep, we can see that I have all of these different reference planes are showing up now. They're kind of bouncing around in here. So I don't want to have those be able to be exposed into my model project or my Revit model, because I just want to be able to align just to the outside, and I don't want to have to worry about picking the wrong line. If I come back in here and I select, I can go into I'll select them, and I can go into the reference, and I will scroll up and say not a reference. And then when I load it into the project and I click on align, we'll see that I don't see those anymore. I just have my center lines and I have my outside elements, and that's it. So really important information on the bones. Kind of jumping around a little bit here between the bones and the muscles and the skin, but wanted to show a little bit more about how reference planes can be determined and used to get the desired results that you want. The next thing that I want to go over is how would I start to set up things like a material. Let's say I want all of these to be a different material, or let's say I want them all to be the same material. What I'll do is I'll come back into my reference level, and I'm going to delete these extra reference planes. They aren't being useful. They serve their purpose for the demonstration. And I'll go into a 3D view. I can see my box, and I will select it. And I can see I have my material here, and the material is just by category, and I have a generic model, so it'll be a generic model material. I don't want that. I want to be able to set it when I'm in my Revit project. And so I'll click on this tiny little box over here, kind of a sneaky button. And I don't have any material parameters set, so it's just none by default. And to create a new one, I will click on this little page with looks like a firecracker going off. And I'll click on new material. For that name, I'll call it material. And now I have another decision. If I want this to be a type, if I want to make all of them update when I change the material in one family, all of the families change, I'll leave it as a type material. If I want to make all of these a different type of material, let's say I'm doing something where all of the geometry is going to be different, and it's a table, and I want to make a bunch of tables with different types of tops or something. Then I will use instance, and I will click on OK. And now I have that new material parameter set, and I'll click on OK. And then I will load this into the project. And to make this a little bit more clear, I'll change my display settings. So now I can select this. Because it's an instance, it's exposed in the properties, and I can change it there. If I made it a type parameter, I'd have to go into edit type and change all of them. But I will go in here and I will click on material, and I will call this wood. See if we have a wood, we'll call this cherry, and OK. And now I have this box as cherry, and the rest don't match. But let's say I do want all of them to match, and I don't want to make all of these unique. If I go back into my project, and I will go to the family types, and I will go to the material, I can select this and essentially edit that parameter. I can change these muscles to do different things. And so for this one in particular, I want it to be actually turn into a type parameter. So I'll click on type, and now all of the same types will all have the same materials, and I will say OK. And then I will load this into the project, and I will overwrite the existing version. And now if I go to edit type, I can see my material for that type. I will change that. I'll make that cherry now. Click OK. We can see it changes everything. So let's say I have all of the bones, I have everything set up, but I only want a minor change. So I want I want these two to be matching, and I want this one to be different. So I can go into Edit Type, and I can rename the first one to Cherry, and I'll click OK, and OK. And now if I click on this, it says Cherry, but I want this top one to be different, so I'll click on Edit Type, and I will duplicate this, and I will call this wood, something else, right? And I'll click OK. Now I can change this because it's a different type. I will find a different wood, perhaps. I will make this pine. And I will say OK and OK. And now we can see the two different types. If I tag these, we'll be able to see that a little bit better. So for this, I'll call this P for pine. And I'll call this one C for cherry. And we can see that now it's automatically, because both of these are the same family type, we're getting the same family tag for them. And because this one is different, we're getting a different tag because we've created a new family type. So hopefully this shows a little bit of the difference between those, how those different parameters work, how these different elements work, and how to change these different things so that they all show up the way that you want to. If I go to a 3D view, we'll see it's not very spectacular. Again, I'm not trying to get too far into the weeds for what all of these elements do, but I did want to show how this works in kind of basic intro to modeling families environment. The next things that I would go into, if we wanted a work plane based family, if I wanted all of these families to be hosted on maybe the face of this element, rather than using a face-based family, which does have has its own merits, what I would actually do is I would come into my original family, and if I click on work plane based, and I will uncheck always vertical. Essentially, always vertical will mean whatever this top element is always going to be up. And I'm not worried about for this. Maybe you're building like a tree or a chimney, and so whatever face you host it to, like you want it to go directly up. Those are really like the only two reference ideas I can think of where I want it to be always vertical. But I definitely want it to be work plane based. So this parameter I'm going to check. And then if I load it into the project and I overwrite it, I'm going to come back into my 3D view, and I'm going to create a component, and I have my tut box. What I can do is I'll have select place on face, and I can click out and make these boxes based on the face. I can select the top face, I can select the outer edge, and so very useful checkbox. And I find this to be exponentially more useful than creating a wall-based or a face-based family. I find the work plane-based is absolutely useful because you can select it, and when you're creating it, if I click on CS for create similar, you can place a work plane-based family on a face. So it really does, it's kind of the best of all worlds. Again, I can come in here and I'll select these, and I can change these now into my wood category that are pine. And they all respond the same because they're all within the same family. If I come into my families and I go to generic models, I'll be able to find this. my tut box, and I can see I have 3 different types of them. I have the default that I made, and then I have the 2 that I changed the name of. So next, maybe these are all cabinets and furniture, so I want to be able to change the category of them. So I will click on it, and I will go to Edit Family, and right now it's currently a generic model, but as we went over in the beginning, I can go up to my family, category, and parameters, and I'll select that, and I can go and either select furniture, or I could go up to casework, click on OK, and then load this into the project and overwrite it. And now they've changed categories, and now the elements that have the wrong category will be deleted. This is unfortunate, but we're going to just click OK. Now if I select it, I can see that that category shows up as casework. So I can then go into like my visibility and graphics and change how these display. They will appear correctly if I have any type of view filters applied or things like that. So from here, the next things that I would go over is talking about parameters and getting into formulas, because we can say that maybe the z is x plus y, which is a very simple one. We'll say OK. And now the 3D, the height is always the width times or x times y. So but I want to go further into that. That's a whole different video as well. So let me know in the comments of how far that you want me to take building families, and if you do want me to go further, maybe also let me know in the comments what type of family are you working on and what do you want me to create. This is again very simple, but we can get very complex very quickly. One other thing that I'll add as to the usefulness of creating a family versus an in-place mass, besides being able to host this and draw it around and having all of the parameters be flexible and change multiple things, is this is really helping the model performance. If I built all of these as in-place masses and we think about Revit as kind of like a database, each one of the in-place masses, each of these are going to occupy a separate line item in that database. And so I will have 14 or however many different families I have, all taking up a different line item. But if I have them as families instead of in-place masses or in-place or model in-place elements, is that each one of these only take up a single line. And so it will greatly reduce your file size and also help with your performance of your model. So while in this case, I just have essentially a bunch of little boxes placed everywhere, and this could totally be done with doing model in place, I want to make sure that whatever I'm doing for my scope of work isn't going to compound a problem with later on having a Revit file that's multiple gigs. And so to do that, by making each of these their own family that I can then select, if we look, we only have a single family type for all of these different, or we have a single base family for all of these different versions. And then we have a couple of different separate types. So we have, 2 different types here. This is going to help Revit's performance. Don't discredit the workflow to make your own family. Even though it might be something simple, it could help you immensely down the road. If we think about this as in the case of what I'm showing here, it doesn't matter. But if we think about something where we're building a large project or even a small project, I always want that file to be able to open up quickly, and I want to be able to edit what I'm doing in a really kind of seamless manner. The more of the in-place models that I have, or it's, again, if we go over to here, architecture, and I go to component and I say model in place, I try to avoid this tool as much as I absolutely can, because it'll just consistently add up, and a bunch of drops in the bucket can lead to a flood if you're not careful. So more often than not, I find it easier to make a family, and then I can always go into my edit family, modify what I need in its own environment, load it back in, and have everything that I want being adjusted. And as we can see, I've changed everything to be previously. I've added the formula that the height is based on the width times the length. So um, all of this is kind of changing around a little bit more. If I change this X down to like 12, we'll see that shrink. So a little bit of an explanation of why to use families rather than model in place, and a little tiny teaser as to using formulas. And formulas, again, are their own thing. Let me know if you want me to go over that. Let me know if you want me to get further into making these models more detailed. Let me know what your thoughts are and where to go from here. Happy to hear it. Happy to hear your comments. I love it when people comment on this and this type of stuff. And again, hopefully this was useful to you. Thanks.